He is just operating in a different world. He's operating in the prophetic world of inspiration and revelation, not of academic Egyptology, right?
Right.
Yeah, if it's after the fall of the Roman Empire, it's like, that's current events to us, right? So,
Current events is like Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce.
Oh, okay.
So to make it clear, you're not saying avoid any kind of negativity towards the church.
No, I'm saying avoid specifically groups on the internet that exist to foster that negativity and to exploit that negativity, to exploit those vulnerable feelings, to turn them into rage, to turn them into anger, to turn them into feelings of being upset and betrayed and drawing out all those negative emotions.
Welcome to the Third Hour podcast, where we talk about church culture and real topics within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, like the Book of Abraham. My name is Mimi, and I'm your co-host, and joined, like always, with my co-host and husband, Eric.
Hey, guys.
We have a very special guest today. I'm so excited to introduce Stephen Smoot. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm even feeling better being here with you, Mimi and Eric, with your infectious, fun personality. So I'm excited.
Please.
Always a bright day when I can record with Mimi, right? You know?
Stephen Smoot, you are the best. We go way back to my Saints Unscripted days. Yeah. That's where we met originally. And Stephen is just the best. Like, not only is he so smart, but he's so fun to be around. So we're so excited you're here. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. You can keep going, you know.
Why stop there?
Why stop there? You know, what other superlative adjectives can you throw my way? I'm always happy for it.
Jedi Master.
I'll take that.
That's the one that comes
That's
to
better
mind.
than PhD candidate, right? You know.
Okay, no, tell everyone a little bit about yourself. You probably have seen Stephen, and like you do a ton of interviews. Like, I feel like you're
I was just on
everywhere.
with David Snell not too long ago.
Yeah.
Also talking about the Book of Abraham, right? You know.
Perfect. If people don't know you, like, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I am currently a PhD candidate at the Catholic University of America. My area of academic study is Semitic and Egyptian languages and literature. So I have 1 foot in biblical studies and 1 foot in Egyptology. And I've made this sort of chimera Frankenstein monster of a doctorate program where I study both at the same time. And so something like the Book of Abraham is sort of right up that alley, right? Yeah. Bringing together biblical studies and Egyptology. So that's sort of my, I guess you could say, my secular academic background.
So what are you doing here?
Why are you here
Why
today?
are you here?
So
Yeah,
good.
what are you doing back here? Well, I finished my coursework and my exam, so I'm a PhD candidate. So the last thing I have to write is my dissertation, which I'm going to start working on very soon here. In the meantime, the reason why I'm back here in Utah, and this gets to the Latter-day Saint side of my work, is I am an adjunct instructor of ancient scripture at BYU in the Department of Religious Education. So I'm teaching at BYU, teaching ancient scripture, and people ask me what that means, and I say it's all the old stuff. So Bible, Book of Mormon, Pearl of Great Price, all that stuff is sort of what I teach and focus on.
So not like church history.
Not so much church history, right?
Which,
they have
to Mimi, is all the old stuff.
That's all the old stuff too. Right, yeah. Well, see, in my field, you know, anything older or anything younger than, like, you know, AD 800 is like recent news. You know what I mean? Like,
oh my gosh.
Because we deal with stuff from like the Bronze Age, and so if it's after the fall of the Roman Empire, it's like, that's current events to us, right? So 200 years church history, like, that's all great and exciting, right?
That just happened yesterday.
Yeah.
No, current events is like Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce.
Oh, okay.
Like
For him, that hasn't even happened yet. It's not on a papyrus.
Until I find a
stone
cuneiform document
tablet.
mentioning Taylor Swift, then it's not within my wheelhouse per se, right? But so my Latter-day Saint side of things, that's what I'm doing. I'm teaching at BYU. I do research on Latter-day Saint topics, Book of Abraham, Book of Mormon, the scriptures of the Restoration. And so I guess I've just carved out this nice little niche for myself where I can navigate both worlds, both sort of the secular academic world within biblical studies and within Egyptology, which I participated in. As a matter of fact, I was just in Egypt a week or two ago working on some hieratic ostraca in Cairo, which was a lot of fun.
We know what that is.
Of course, everybody here knows about their hieratic ostraca, right? Shout out to all my hieratic fans out there in the audience, right? So I have 1 foot in that world, but then I'm participating in Latter-day Saint academic circles, writing and publishing on those subjects as well. And I don't know, what can I say? It's a great experience. It's good, clean fun, as one of my undergrad professors at BYU would like to say. Whenever
Isn't
we
all
would
of
read
it
the
dirty?
Bible.
It's all super old and dusty.
No, here's the thing. I let the archaeologists get dusty by digging up the stuff, and then I'm the one that reads the stuff after they've dug it up and published it, right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's how you do it. Oh my gosh. Okay, I have another fun question to ask
sure.
you. we like to start the episode, kind of get to know you more. How
You're really setting this up.
well, this is to me. I feel like it can tell a lot about a person.
It's gonna be a very deep and probing question.
And you might have to check, but on your phone. But how many tabs do you have open in your Gospel Library app?
Okay, so 0. Because here's why.
Have the app.
I have the app. I don't keep the tabs. After I'm done, I close them.
Wow. Interesting.
That's for everything. Gospel Library, my Gmail, my everything, right? Like,
good for you.
Yeah, my Google Chrome, my phone.
Live a clean life.
I see these people that have like a million tabs open, or you look at the notification bubbles on like their Gmail app, and it's like, you have 38,000 unread emails, and I want to scream and like pull off my fingernails when I see that, right? Like, no. I'm the guy who I have to close everything at the end of the day. Okay. I have to have all the little notification bubbles cleared out, and if not, when I go to sleep, I feel dirty inside or something. I can't go to sleep. So so that's an easy one to answer, right? I like a cool, clean app at the end of the day after I'm done using it. I know for some people that sounds absolutely crazy, but I don't know, just anything different than that, and I just kind of go nuts.
So I guess that is interesting to me. So when you do your personal study, do you do that on your phone or using like paper scriptures?
Books all the time. Okay. Physical paper stuff all the time.
That makes more sense. Because I was like, how do you keep your spot then?
Yep. Yeah.
Well, they have bookmarks, but I feel like people don't really use.
Yeah.
Oh, not bookmarks in real books, but
not that paper stuff, like
I don't do. No.
Yeah. So Mimi, there's these things called books, paper books, written on these things called paper, which are dead trees, right?
Which you study because you do ancient history.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm an old fogey when it comes to that stuff, right? I prefer old books. I'm an amateur book collector too. I love collecting old books and things like that. But for my personal study, look, the electronic stuff is fine for helping me find things, whatever.
The electronic mail.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
You are old, though. I'm
Absolutely, no, that's fine. It's a good, handy resource for convenience, for easy access. I'll use electronic versions of stuff for like searching for things or references or whatever, right? But if I want to actually like jump into the world of whatever I'm studying, I 100% prefer physical copies of books over e-versions of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense then.
If I had things my way, we'd all go back to papyrus and clay tablets, right? So just be grateful that I'm not in charge.
This is a lot more durable though and lasting, right? Isn't that like one of the issues of papyrus? They don't last?
Papyrus is questionable if it's because it's organic material. If you're leaving it in environments where the material will perish. So if it's very wet and humid, for example. But clay tablets, man, those will last for a long time if you just properly store them in a nice dry place.
And everyone will be strong, carry them around all day in your backpack.
Sure, yeah. Well, some of these clay tablets from Mesopotamia, they're like just that big, right? You can get these little guys, and so
just like a little flashcard,
something like that.
That's
cute. So I mean, they have the big ones, obviously, and the huge prisms, right, and things like that, the big standing ones. But you can also get little ones that fit in your palm. So, just it's like collecting records, like vinyls. That's the thing that hipsters like to do today, right? So
they're like little trading cards of clay tablets.
Yeah, absolutely, like baseball cards or Pokemon cards. Just get cuneiform clay tablets that you want to trade, right? Yeah, good stuff.
That's kind of fun.
See, I'm selling Mimi on it right now. I can tell.
I was like, I can tell you have a small collection you're trying to increase the value of by like trying to get everyone bought in. You're like, I got some clay tablets I got to offload on people, so you guys got to get bought in so I can sell these.
I'm not speculating land or Beanie Babies. I'm speculating cuneiform tablets. Yeah, that's my jam.
You came across a guy who's like, I got a whole truckload, high quality clay tablets. Bottom dollar price, you'll love it.
It's going to be the new crypto. It's going to be the new crypto. Mark my words, right? We'll make NFTs out of this stuff. It'll be great.
Catch me in my van after we record this. I got some stuff to show you. Great deals.
Yeah.
No, okay. I think it's interesting. We asked our audience the same question about going back. We're not talking about clay tablets anymore. Back to the Gospel Library app tabs. Because, well, hear me out. I probably have 200
oh wow okay.
tabs open because every time you open and like I don't know how it happens.
It's like you ever hit a link or
if you ever hit
a
link, a new one opens and I don't know. There's a lot. And
she just does that.
It's just
in
there.
General, though. Like
it's just there.
Like her web browser on her phone, same thing. Like
a million tabs.
She opens a new tab. The other ones don't exist anymore.
Yeah,
they're gone. So it wouldn't keep her up at night because like they don't exist to her anymore.
Yeah.
They're gone.
It's like
they're just in the void of cyberspace.
And then I open her phone. I'm like, I have 500 Chrome tabs open, and she's like, I don't know.
500 Chrome tabs. Yeah. My boss is like that. I should also mention I moonlight with the B.H. Roberts Foundation. So
cool.
Shout out to my friends at the B.H. Roberts Foundation, and to Mormoner.org if you want to check it out sometime. But my boss, Josh Coates, great guy. He's like that with this computer. So I've seen his computer where he'll have like the bajillion different browsers up and tabs on the browsers. Mimi, you're a wonderful person. I think you're a great, lovely person. But I have to say, if we were married and I saw that's what was happening, immediate divorce. If my future spouse has 500 tabs open at the end of the day, like, man, we're gonna have to have some serious couples therapy to get through that one, right?
You know what a real supportive husband does? Is he'll sit
validates
there
you in the self-destructive behavior.
No, I can't do that. That's too far.
He'll sit there for 10 minutes and close all my tabs for me.
Okay, that's true love. That is true love right there.
I did that when we were dating. I've since stopped because it's a futile effort.
Yeah,
I
thought there was a chance. Like if I got her caught up, I was like, here's your.
You thought you could change her. You thought you could,
right. And now you can maintain it. And then I go back in like a couple months later, and I'm like, how are you already up to 200 tabs again?
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Well, Eric, how many tabs do you have open?
Probably 8, off the top of my head. Because it's like I have a tab for like the hymns at church. I have a tab for Sunday school, for Elders Quorum, for my personal Book of Mormon study, our couples, like what we're reading together, and then like Come Follow Me. So I've got like one for each, so I can just hop to the So it's like next week I just swipe one to the right rather than having to like go find it again.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I wanted to ask our audience, because that's where this whole thing came up. And so I did a poll for our audience, and like almost 800 people submitted answers. And the options were, how many tabs do you have open? 1 to 5. 5 to 10, or 10 plus.
So Stephen could not participate in the poll.
Well,
0.
I
guess put me at 1, I suppose. Right? Like, I guess the home screen is a tab, right, or whatever.
Yeah, sure. I was like, should I start it at 0? I was like, no, nobody does that. Like, we have to start at 1.
You've met Stephen the robot.
You've met the outlier.
0.
Do you guys have any guesses on how the results came in?
I don't know, but if the plus 10 is the largest answer, I'm going to wish for a meteor to destroy humanity, because I don't know if I can live in a civilization that permits that kind of wild behavior. So hopefully not the plus 10 is the highest answer.
No.
Okay, good.
It wasn't. But so about half of people have 1 to 5 tabs open. 25% have 5 to 10, and then 25, 24.
Yeah.
25 have 10 plus.
Okay, great.
So anyway, I just thought it was interesting. Some people are like, I just never close any of them. Some people are like, what if I need them? Or they're like, I listen to this
might come in handy later.
Yeah, there's like hoarding.
Isn't that, I was going to say, the justification that hoarders use for this sort of
behavior?
But it's hoarding scriptures now.
No, it's funny because they're like, I listened to this one conference talk and it was so good. I just need to have access to it. And I'm like, that is what hoarders say.
See, that is when you actually use a bookmark.
Yeah,
that's where you pull that in, because then you can put it. I think you can put a note next to it or whatever, and
something like that.
Then you have like this searchable list instead, so you can go back and reference it.
Yeah.
So like that's the one time where I feel like you would actually use the bookmarks in the app.
Yeah. We need to start doing the bookmarks more. We need to be a little more like Stephen. But I thought this would
go back to clay tablets. Don't ever count that out, right?
We'll see. We'll see. Let us know in the comments how you feel about the clay tablets. But I thought it'd be fun to ask
Kindle versus
you.
clay tablets. Let's get a poll of your readers and see which one they want to go with, right?
There you go.
No, but you are the perfect person to ask, because I'm sure he does a lot of research on the app, but I guess now we know it's all paper all the way. So
as much as I can. And when I do use the app, at the end of the day, it's clean slate.
Okay.
Yep. He deletes every single app on his phone too.
Absolutely.
So
I
reinstall what he
them
needs in the
day.
morning.
Right. Exactly.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, the next thing we want to do, because obviously we're talking about Book of Abraham.
Sure.
That's your thing. But we do have an advice segment on our show.
Okay.
And we have a scenario that we thought you'd be perfect to ask
so like a Dear
about.
Prudence type thing?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I was thinking about writing some papyrus and stuff, and want to
Yeah.
make sure it was going to turn out well. And
Dear Stephen, how do I mummify my cat? Right? Yeah.
Gosh. Do you want to go ahead and read it?
Sure. Yeah, I will go ahead. So they said, I've been a faithful member my whole life. Whenever I was struggling, I knew I could turn to a loving Heavenly Father and lean on Christ's atonement. But recently I stumbled upon this CES letter, and it threw me for a loop.
Oof.
I'd never come across anti-Mormon literature before, so of course, right before my mission was the perfect time for the adversary to send it my way. I didn't quite read through the whole thing. I didn't want to read anything about temple ordinances because I'd not yet received my endowments, but it left me with a feeling of absolute confusion, and most of all, I felt so scared and lost. It made me feel like I'd bet my entire life and salvation on one huge lie. It has been hard to shake that feeling. I found someone's rebuttal to the letter to be very helpful because it was coming from someone like me. I felt the Spirit had led me to read this rebuttal and realize that many things aren't as dismal as I assumed. Reading it came with a lot of great information, but just like the CES letter, I hadn't found any of the information on my own. I was just choosing to believe something that fit better with my beliefs in the proverbial echo chamber without actually finding any facts for myself. So as I continue on this path, I feel like both sides are trying to sell me on what they think is true instead of actually presenting the truth. And I don't have all the time in the world to find the answers on my own before I put in my mission papers. I feel like this trial may be just what I need before I head out on my mission, but what's the goal of it? I'm still unsure whether it's supposed to be strengthening my faith or to expose the truth to me so that I could walk away satisfied. Do you have any advice?
Wow. Yes. I can say a few things about that. That's a story that I've heard many times, or a story similar to that one, right? So I guess the first word of advice I would give to this audience member is I hope they don't feel like they're alone in this. Like this is the first time anybody has ever encountered this kind of new upsetting information, has gone through this process of really questioning what they believe. I know it can feel very lonely, right? Especially if perhaps you don't have any friends or family that have gone through a similar, we like to call it a faith crisis, right? That can feel very lonely. Your mileage may vary on how helpful your immediate leaders might be to help you in these sorts of situations because they may or may not have had this experience. So the first word of advice I would say is to take a deep breath, take a step back, and just know that you're not alone in this, right? There are lots and lots of people who have tread this path before. And a good thing to do is to find good, uplifting communities of like-minded believers who have had similar experiences that you can also discuss these things with, get their perspectives on things with. And the corollary to that is I would strongly urge that you assiduously avoid websites that are going to mire you down in negativity, that are going to draw just the worst parts out of people when they jump on the internet together. There's some specific websites I have in mind. I guess since we're in polite company, I'll save my words on those. But I think people know kind of what I'm talking about, right?
So to make it clear, you're not saying avoid any kind of negativity towards the church.
No, I'm saying avoid specifically groups on the internet that exist to foster that negativity and to exploit that negativity, to exploit those vulnerable feelings, to turn them into rage, to turn them into anger, to turn them into feelings of being upset and betrayed and drawing out all those negative emotions, right? That is not a healthy, wholesome way to navigate a faith crisis, right? So that would sort of be my first word of advice. My second word of advice would be, as you are trying to make sense of the information that you're encountering, multiple perspectives, multiple claims, right? Competing or contrasting claims of what is true, right? It is advisable to stick with people who know the material best with whatever the given subject might be. And so if your options are to go with a seasoned, well-defined expert in the field on a subject, as opposed to an internet rando or some grifting podcaster, let's say, right? If your options are those, I would advise this person, anybody else, to go with the seasoned expert in this field, right? They are more likely to give you good, solid, accurate information as you make your own decisions about what you do or do not believe, or where you go with this faith crisis experience, right? So that's kind of my second word of advice, is be very careful with who you get your information from. I know it's kind of a cliche, but it really is true that we live in a miasma of misinformation that you can get online, right? And not all knowledge is created equal.
And everyone has a voice now. Like
everyone has a voice now.
Two of us have a podcast. What's up with that?
Yeah.
They give podcasts to anybody these days, and they let any schmuck come off on the street onto their podcast, right? Yeah. Exactly. So, so that would be sort of my second word of advice. Yeah. And then my third word of advice, and then I'll stop my filibuster, would just be to remember those formative spiritual experiences that you have had, and let those ground you in your foundation for what you know to be true, right? And so it's really easy to lose sight of those formative spiritual experiences and that knowledge you may have received from God in your formative years. It's easy to overlook that in the confusion, in the hurt feelings, in the feelings of uncertainty. I've found for me a way to anchor myself when I encounter new information or confusing things that I may not, be able to fully resolve in the moment, or when I have hurt feelings about something, is to go back to those foundational experiences to help ground myself as I try to process this new information. So I guess in a nutshell, those are my 3 little words of advice. Number 1, find a good, solid community of healthy, good people that you can talk with, you can become friends with to help you with this process. Avoid the bad parts of the internet. Avoid specifically people that are going to take advantage of your confusion or your hurt feelings, right? That's the first word of advice. Second word of advice, really be careful with what information you're consuming and where you're getting it from. Consult the best expert sources on these topics related to the church, right? And then the third word of advice is to stick to your guns, your foundational spiritual guns, right? Your experiences, your knowledge you've gained as you navigate new information and new experiences that you may have.
There you go.
Amazing answer.
Sounds like you might have answered that before somewhere.
Maybe a time or two, right? I may have had some students in the past come to me with similar questions, right? And so it kind of comes with the territory. But hopefully there's some wisdom in there buried deep down inside that can help this listener.
It's amazing. Thank you. And thank you for the summary.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring, no, it was great. And and I wanted to bring one other thing up too, as you were talking about point 3 of going back to those formative spiritual experiences, is I cannot emphasize enough journaling. Because I feel like it's so easy when you're in that faith crisis and you're spiraling and you're like, well, I was so young then, like that it was just a placebo or just in my mind. It's so easy just to like discount everything. But if I have one piece of advice to any youth or anyone listening, it's like, if you have a really big spiritual experience, write it down in a journal somewhere that you can refer back to. And in those moments, it's just more solidified and you're able to recount that easier. So I've done that when I was a teenager. I've not been as great at it recently, just as, life happens and we're busy. But as a teenager, I would, if you're feeling the Spirit strongly, write down your testimony and you never know when you might need
it can come in handy later. Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you so much. And let's go ahead and get into the book of Abraham, because in the CES letter, as was brought up, there's a whole section about the book of Abraham. So just as a recap, a book of Abraham 101, if you will.
Sure. Well, should we step back? First of all, I mean, you're mentioning CES letter. There might be several people listening that are like, what is that? Is that a letter?
Yeah, what the heck is it?
Is that a letter from like the CES leadership? Like, who is this letter?
No.
So should we take a stab at...
I mean, we could just super briefly introduce. Sure. We don't have to go deep.
But. Yeah, right. So the CES letter was written by a fellow named Jeremy Runnels, who grew up as a Latter-day Saint. And by his account, he, and I'm going to try to fairly represent him because I have some serious disagreements with the CES letter and with Jeremy Runnels, but I'll do my best to kind of fairly represent him and his self-given origin story for this. By his account, he encountered information about the church that bothered him, that disturbed him. He talks about how he had these questions arise in his mind, and he was instructed to reach out to a local CES Institute director. CES, I should say, stands for the Church Educational System, right? So seminaries and institutes, things like that, right? At least back in the day, it's kind of different now, but CES, Church Educational System. He was encouraged to reach out to a local regional director of the institute in the CES to give him his questions, right? To try to help resolve these things. By his account, if I understand correctly, he says that the CES director never gave him any answers or never gave him any satisfying answers. He remained silent. And this, I suppose, confirmed to Jeremy's mind that these answers or these questions are unanswerable and that this is damning towards the church's truth claims. And so he threw together the CES letter, which is sort of like he read the riot acts against the church. So not every argument, but almost every argument that you can make against the church, right? He kind of packages it all together in this. It's basically an online PDF, right? he throws it together, and it goes viral. It sort of becomes, in some ways, it becomes sort of like the manifesto or clarion call of many ex-Latter-day Saints today, who will point to the CES letter as like, see, here's all the reasons why the church can't be true, why Joseph Smith's claims can't be true, and therefore why you should leave the church and not believe it anymore, right? That's kind of what it sort of has become. If I can shamelessly plug something from Mormoner.org, Mormoner has a Q&A article on the origins of the CES letter and Jeremy Reynolds' background. And so if you want sort of a rundown there, you can check that out. But in a nutshell, I think that's it. I hope I haven't misrepresented anything about it. I don't believe I have, but that should give listeners kind of a basic idea of what the CES letter is. And yes, indeed, Mimi, within the CES letter, there's a section on the Book of Abraham. It's not a very good section on the Book of Abraham, but it's there nonetheless. And many people have cited this as an example of something that's damning to Joseph Smith's truth claims and the church's claims, and one of the reasons why you should no longer believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet.
Great summary. No, I think you nailed that. I don't know if we should. I just know that there are a lot of people who like might be interested in like, oh, like, what is this? Should I read it? Do you have a perspective on like just the accuracy or like, I don't know, like, if that's a good question.
The CES letter is not very good. It's riddled with errors, both factual errors and errors of interpretation, or I should say questionable interpretations of the data that we do have. The CES letter is designed specifically to, like I said, it's kind of like a manifesto for ex-Mormonism, right? Like,
it's meant to tear down people's faith and say, here's everything bad.
Yeah, it's meant to tell people, here's all the reasons why you should not believe in Joseph Smith. So there's no attempt whatsoever for it to remain, quote, unbiased or objective or anything like that. There's no attempt to portray any other perspective or side to these issues. It's very much a one-note song, as it were, on here's this issue, plural marriage, Book of Mormon, Book of Abraham, blacks in the priesthood, and here's why it's damning to the church, and here's why you shouldn't believe it, right? But in terms of its accuracy, no, it's not very accurate. It's not very good. I've read through it several times, of course. I've helped craft responses to it. I've responded to it on my personal blog, for example, right? And if you want some sort of indication to know why it's not very good, just go ask any actual expert in Latter-day Saint topics, Latter-day Saint history, scripture. Ask them what they think about the CES letter, and like uniformly, they think it's a joke. And I'm sorry if that's going to upset people for saying that, but that's the truth. I run in academic circles, in Latter-day Saint academic circles. And beyond its interest as sort of like a cultural artifact within current, pop culture or whatever, besides its value as sort of like a cultural artifact in the history of sort of Latter-day Saint apologetics and polemics and criticisms, beyond that, which Latter-day Saints will study, academics will study, no Latter-day Saint academic who is expert in their field takes the CES letter seriously or takes its claims seriously, right? Because it's not a serious document. It's an orange PDF on the internet. That's what it is. Well, anyways, I won't say more about that. I could, but that gives you a sense of why I recommend people, not going to my point earlier, not to take their points of information from the CES letter, but rather to seek out those experts who are published with reputable academic venues, who have the appropriate academic training on these topics, and to seek them out in order to get better information on these issues that they may have questions about or be struggling with, because they are not going to get it in the form of Jeremy Reynolds and the CES letter.
And you referenced Latter-day Saint academics.
Yeah.
I'm sure people watching are like, well, they're going to be biased toward the church, right? Are there any like neutral? I mean, neutral is...
Latter-day Saint academics that aren't necessarily part of the church.
Well, I mean, sure, you have plenty of non-Latter-day Saint scholars who write on Latter-day Saint history, who write on Latter-day Saint scripture. And even if they are not believers themselves, they may not believe Joseph Smith's claims about revelations or angels or whatever, right? They are a better source than Jeremy Reynolds in the CES letter, because they are qualified academics who write in again, not neutral or unbiased, because everybody has biases, including Latter-day Saint academics and others, but they are at least respectful and careful, or they try to be, for the most part, respectful and careful in the information they present about the Latter-day Saints and our history and our scripture, right? And so, basically what my point is here is, like, you're pretty much better off going to anybody except Jeremy Reynolds in the CES letter to get good, solid information on these topics related to Latter-day Saints and related to our history, our scripture. I, of course, have my own bias. I freely acknowledge that, and I have in the past, right? But having a bias doesn't mean you're wrong, and having a bias doesn't automatically disqualify somebody from being able to give reliable information and reliable perspective on these things. My issue with Jeremy Reynolds in the CES letter is not that he's biased, it's that he's wrong on a lot of things, and that people are getting wrong, bad information on a lot of things, right? And that's what I'm trying to help people avoid, right? So, of course, hey, everybody, spoiler alert, I'm a faithful, active Latter-day Saint, and I have that bias that I carry with me. Of course I do, right? But my bias doesn't disqualify me. And by the way, on a lot of these issues, I'm more right than Jeremy Reynolds is. Sorry, I know that's going to sound kind of snobby to some people, but it's true. So but for whatever it's worth, right?
Yeah. And where can people find this? Like, what resources do you recommend for people?
So it would depend on the subject, obviously, right? But sort of broadly speaking, some of the organizations that I would recommend, there's the Interpreter Foundation that publishes a journal and publishes books. There's Fair LDS, or Fair Mormon, it used to be called, right? They're a group I've done some work with, and others have done some great work with. At BYU, there's the Religious Studies Center, which regularly produces both books and a journal, right? You've got the Neal A. Maxwell Institute at BYU, formerly FARMS, now the Foundation for Ancient Research and Mormon Studies, now the Maxwell Institute, right? They've produced some worthwhile things to consider. So, like, there's no shortage of resources. And then there's individual Latter-day Saint authors, right? And historians. Of course, I should also mention up in Salt Lake City, you've got the Joseph Smith Papers Project being produced by the Church History Department, right? The Joseph Smith Papers is some of the best documentary editing that's been done on any historical figure, right? Like, this is top shelf work they've done at the Joseph Smith Papers, right? And so they have tremendous resources that are accessible for people who want to know more. And then there's individual authors, depending on the subject, that I can recommend, right? So there's no shortage of resources out there. It just requires some legwork to find these sources, to spend time with them, to look them carefully. And I'm sorry to say, but that means turning away from the orange PDF and the podcasts that come from ex-Mormon grifters and going towards reliable, established scholars in the field.
Right.
There you go.
Period. And I mean, if anything, because I know, like, the CES letter, it can be convincing. And the first time you're discovering it, it's like, whoa, what is all of this? But, like, at the bare minimum, at least spend as much time as you are on that document as other documents, pro-LDS documents, if you will, or even neutral, like you're saying. So anyway, thank you so much for those resources. I didn't expect it to go that way, but I think that will be very beneficial to a lot of people.
I hope it will be, and I'm also sure that it will not inspire any flame wars in the comments, because people, of course, don't have passionate views about the CES letter, Jeremy Reynolds, right? So I'm excited for what's going to happen to your mentions, right, and your notifications on this episode, right? Yeah, yeah, exactly.
These are all Stephen's ideas.
Hey, I'll take full responsibility for the fact that I think Jeremy Reynolds is a hack and his orange PDF is bad. So rage away all you want in the comments of that. I'm happy to take that. I'm happy to stand by it.
Awesome. Well, let's get into Book of Abraham.
Great,
so we want to do like a little Book of Abraham 101.
Sure.
Just to recap.
Sure, absolutely.
Not actually a whole 101 as a professor. Like,
we don't need the whole.
We can do a semester, right? This will be lecture 1 of a whole series on it, right? Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about where it came from.
Sure.
What the translation process was like, and what is actually kind of taught, like what from the church, as a church have we gotten.
Another question too is translation even a proper word to be using?
Ooh, yeah, that's an interesting question. So before I get into that, I'm going to again shamelessly plug something.
Yes, please.
I don't know which camera I'm looking at, but one of them, I guess the red one. So whoever's editing this, right, the red one. I would strongly recommend this book. This is a book, well, it's an issue of BYU Studies Quarterly. Hey, there's another resource, BYU Studies. It's a journal and a publisher through BYU that does great scholarship. BYU Studies, this is an issue of the journal they do 4 times a year. This came out earlier this year. It's entitled A Guide to the Book of Abraham.
That sounds relevant.
Written by yours truly and my colleagues John Gee, Carrie Muhlstein, and John S. Thompson. Shout out to them because they were great.
So you're just selling this because you wrote the book. Okay.
Absolutely. But here's the thing, though. I'm not just a cold-hearted mercenary because I don't get any money from this book, right? And so, in fact, it's for free online, and hopefully you can include the link in the description.
Yes.
Is there a PDF of it online?
There absolutely is a PDF online.
Can I make it look orange?
If you want to, please, by all means, right? But you can also pick up a physical copy for like $10 or something, right? And again, all the money goes to BYU Studies and not to me. Anyways, this was published earlier precisely to help Latter-day Saints with Book of Abraham 101, right? And so it's divided into 3 sections. The first section is on the coming forth and translation of the Book of Abraham. The second section is on the Book of Abraham's historicity and the Book of Abraham in the ancient world. And the third section is on the facsimiles of the Book of Abraham, which we all love because that's what we would color as kids in sacrament meeting when we were bored, right? So, I guess I'll try very briefly to give a Book of Abraham 101.
Yeah, summarize and then...
So I was going to say, what you basically just said is, I got a whole book about it, so I know about a 5-minute answer.
Yeah, sure. No, I'll do my best. So the story of the Book of Abraham begins in July of 1835 when a fellow named Michael Chandler rides into Kirtland, Ohio. Chandler is sort of a traveling showman, an antiquities dealer of sorts. He rides into Kirtland, Ohio with a collection of papyrus scrolls and mummies. We don't know exactly how he as one does, right?
Just here in America,
you just here in America,
show up,
right?
You know?
There's a fascinating history behind sort of the history of Egyptology and studies in Egypt, excavations in Egypt, and how mummies and papyrus scrolls and other artifacts end up throughout Europe and North America. Chandler and others involved with this is sort of part of that legacy. But he meets with Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith says that within these collection of papyrus scrolls presented to him include the writings of Abraham, the biblical patriarch, and the writings of his, I guess would be his great-grandson, Joseph of Egypt, right? So writings of Abraham, writings of Joseph. Joseph Smith and other Latter-day Saints pool together some money to purchase, he wants the papyri, Joseph Smith does, but Chandler wants to get rid of the mummies too. So Joseph Smith purchases a small collection of papyrus rolls and some mummies. We think maybe 3 or 4 of them from what we can tell. And he has possession of these artifacts until his death in 1844.
Put the mummies in his house on a couch?
Yeah, he absolutely did. Yeah. So actually, that's exactly what he did. He kept the mummies and the papyrus scrolls in his house. He then gave them to his mom, and she kept them in her house. And she would charge people. Actually, we know the rate you charge people to see mummies. It's 25 cents. Because that's what Lucy Mack Smith would charge people.
What's that scaled up for inflation now?
Oh, I'm not sure exactly. I'm sure someone could find out. But back in the day, it's 25 cents to come see the mummies, right?
Oh my gosh.
So that's exactly what happens. He has these antiquities from Egypt. And after coming into possession of these antiquities, he produces what he says is a translation called the Book of Abraham, right? So the primary work of translation is done that summer in Kirtland of 1835. And then it's completed in Nauvoo in the spring of 1842 when it's published serially in the Times and Seasons, which is the church's newspaper, right? It's published in 3 installments, the text and the facsimiles we have between March and May of 1842. And it gets put into the Pearl Great Price in 1851, which is created by Elder Franklin D. Richards over in Great Britain, right? So Elder Richards is an apostle. He reproduces material from Joseph Smith, including the Book of Abraham, in what he calls the Pearl Great Price. That Pearl Great Price gets canonized in 1880, right? So that's sort of the short story of how we get the Book of Abraham in our scriptures, right? How we have this interesting text in our scriptures. So that's the history of its publication. Now, Eric, you wonder, and others have wondered, so Joseph Smith calls this thing a translation. That's the word he uses consistently to describe this work. On one occasion, he calls it a revelation, right? As editor of the Times and Seasons, he calls it a revelation, so that's interesting. People wonder, what kind of a translation? How did he translate, right? We have a chapter in the book covering this, right, and showing what we know about it.
And now you're not going to tell us.
No, I'm not going to tell us. You
got to go buy the book and find out.
Code Stephen for 15% off.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah. But what I can say very briefly is we actually don't know a lot about the translation process of the Book of Abraham. It's unfortunate that we know very little about it because Joseph Smith and those associated with him who produced this text, they don't say a lot about the precise process, about how it's accomplished. And so that leaves us with the task to try to reconstruct it as best we can based on the manuscripts we have, right? So the manuscripts have survived. There's questions about what do we see in the manuscripts that give us clue about its translation. We have some indication from Joseph Smith and his scribes about the translation process. But the most we really get is that they say it's being done by revelation. We have multiple sources saying that Joseph Smith is claiming to receive revelation to produce this translation, right? People wonder if the seer stone was used in the translation. I published an article on this last year, and the answer I can give is maybe. Again, it's tricky, right? Because we have some good sources, but not perfect sources on this. Nothing from Joseph Smith, but from people close to him, contemporaries. He perhaps uses the seer stone. I think it's probably likely he did, right? And so what we can say is that the translation, the method of translation is revelation, or it's claimed to be revelation, inspiration. That means that Joseph Smith is not producing this text the way I or other Egyptologists or scholars would translate an ancient text, right? Joseph Smith is not no Egyptian as an academic. He doesn't study the Egyptian language the way academics would study it, and he's not producing a translation that way. He's producing it by revelation. So that we can say pretty securely, okay? There's questions about the papyrus he uses. What role does the papyrus serve? Is there an actual text, a copy of Abraham's writings in these papyri scrolls he has? Or do the papyrus scrolls act as sort of a catalyst to him receive revelation to render the translation? So in that case, the text we have would have been disassociated from the papyri.
Could have been an Egypt cookbook, but because it looks ancient, it helps him pray better.
It sparks that revelatory process, perhaps. That's a theory some have suggested. Again, we don't know enough for sure to say with absolute confidence. My personal judgment,
I feel like that's what's often taught.
Sure, yeah. When you have these ambiguities left, you have to kind of fill in the blanks, fill in the gaps the best you can. And I'm not here to tell people which theory specifically. We lay them out in the book, the most popular theories people have. I'm not here to be dogmatic and say you must believe one or the other. For my money, I believe that Joseph Smith did have a copy of Abraham's writings within the papyri scrolls that came into his possession. I believe that our translated Book of Abraham text is a rendering of an ancient text, right? An actual rendering of Abraham's writings. But I would not put Joseph Smith in the same league as academic Egyptologists then or now, right? So I try to disassociate the process of how he got this text from the academic process, right? Because he is just operating in a different world. He's operating in the prophetic world of inspiration and revelation, not of academic Egyptology, right?
Right.
And so from the way you talk about this, it sounds like none of the papyrus survived, or some of it, or what?
So good question. That's the next fun part of the story, right? So after Joseph Smith dies, we can track the collection of his mummies and his papyri. We know where they go and where they end up. A portion of his collection ends up in St. Louis. St. Louis and then Chicago, right? It ends up in St. Louis, Missouri, and then in Chicago. And that portion of the collection is destroyed in the Chicago fire of, 1871, I think it is, right? The Great Chicago Fire. We know it's destroyed then because we know it was in the museum. It's called the Woods Museum in Chicago that was like in the epicenter of the fire. So, and sadly, that collection is lost. For a long time, it was thought that the entirety of the collection was there in Chicago. It turns out that after Joseph Smith's death, a portion of the collection did not go to Chicago, but wound up in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, right? And that portion of the collection, no mummies, I'm afraid. The mummies seem to have been burned up. But we do have papyrus fragments that are returned to the church in 1967 from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, right? And that portion of the collection has been studied and translated by Egyptologists, including myself and my colleagues at BYU, right?
So cool.
Very fun, good, clean stuff, right? Yeah, very cool stuff.
Any like Sunday morning cartoons in what you found, or like?
Well, we have some drawings, what Egyptologists call vignettes or illustrations on these papyri. In fact, the illustration that underlines facsimile 1 is survived, so we have that. And if you go to the Joseph Smith Papers website, you can see it because they have digital scans of the papyri online. You can go to the Church History Library, and I think they still have it on display. You can see facsimile one there, right? So yeah, you can go see facsimile one, the original papyrus facsimile one.
Go.
It's actually a lot smaller than you might think, right?
Really?
We might imagine this giant scroll. It's actually very small, right? But this doesn't mean it's less important. It's just calibrate your
tiny
expectations.
Clay tablets, tiny
papyri. Yeah,
it's just more convenient.
So that portion has been studied. It's also been translated, right? And our Book of Abraham text is not found in those papyri fragments, right? So non-LDS Egyptologists, Latter-day Saint Egyptologists have read and translated these documents. Just this week, John Gee and I were looking at scans of the papyri, reading through them, studying them right ourselves. So I can say firsthand, I have firsthand knowledge that the papyri fragments do not contain our Book of Abraham text, right? Now, this is where the controversy steps in, because with this fact...
Got him! It's not there.
Exactly. With this fact on the table, critics of the church, including Jeremy Runnels in the CES letter, they use this as proof that Joseph Smith was a false prophet, or he was making it all up, or he was a scoundrel, right? That it's fake, that the Book of Abraham is fake. You shouldn't believe it. It's a fraudulent text, right? It's not a real translation of Abraham's writings. This accusation rests on a few assumptions. The first assumption that it rests on, or the main assumption it rests on, is that the papyrus fragments that were recovered in 1967 is the source of Joseph Smith's translation, right? Now, there's some reason to think that might be the case, right? Some people have made arguments for why that may be so.
Facsimile's there, then it's got to be it.
Facsimile's there, sure. That's one of the arguments made. But we in the book and elsewhere have questioned those assumptions, right? The people have given for why we have to believe that these papyrus fragments are the ones that were used in the translation, right? Or that they were the source for our English Book of Abraham text. So
you're saying the translation from Joseph Smith, it could have been what was destroyed in the fire.
Yes. I think there's a real possibility. It's not something I can prove, but if you look at the eyewitness accounts of those who describe the papyri and seeing it and handling it and describing the source of the Book of Abraham, they seem to be describing a portion of the collection that does not match the collection that has been returned to the church, right? So
interesting.
That's one of the theories out there. It's one that I am sort of keen on, that I think has a lot of merit to it, right? But even then, even if we posit there was an actual text Joseph is translating, he still is translating by revelation and inspiration. He's not translating it the way an Egyptologist would translate it, because he doesn't know the Egyptian language the way that I and other scholars do, right? And so even then, I can still see room for some discussion about what's called the catalyst theory, that these papyri catalyzed revelation in some sense, right? So you still are operating in the revelatory realm, okay? So again, just very briefly, right, without getting too much in the weeds, those are some of the things that we address and discuss in the book, right? We present the facts as best we can based on our current knowledge, and we acknowledge, right, the papyri fragments do not contain our Book of Abraham text. But then we explain why that is not necessarily damning to Joseph Smith or his claims to being a prophet, like what you encounter in the CES letter and elsewhere. The story is a lot more complicated than that. The story is a lot more nuanced than that. And there is still room for wondering this sort of, where is he actually translating from, right? And so, that's to answer that part of the controversy or the story, right? Some of the papyri are there. You can go up to Salt Lake City and see them, or you can see them online on the Joseph Smith Papers website for yourself, right?
Is there any idea as far as like what percentage of the collection would have been in Chicago versus at the other museum?
It's a good question. There's controversy over it. So there have been attempts to try to quantify how much papyrus is missing. So we know the mummies are missing. We know facsimiles 2 and 3 are missing. Those weren't recovered, right? So it's indisputable that there is some stuff that's missing. The debate or the controversy is how much, and is what is missing what Joseph Smith was utilizing in his translation. I think that's an open question still. My colleague John Gee has given some estimates that he feels confident about, right? And I'm a little bit uncertain still myself. But I think it's more than incidental, right? I think it's more than just some of the few fragments that are missing, right? I get the sense that there's much more material missing, but we just can't say for certainty at this point. So it's an open question still.
Okay.
Gotcha.
And before we go too much deeper too, I want to ask you if you would summarize to just what is in the book of Abraham and just kind of show, like, is it actually important to our church's doctrine, or is it just like something kind of random that it's like,
just some
is
fun
it a big
weird
deal?
Book,
yeah, some weird thing we stick in the back of the scriptures, sure.
Yeah.
So, a quick summary of what's in the book of Abraham. So it starts out with a story about Abraham. He's living in a place called Ur of the Chaldees, right?
Is that a real place?
That's a real place, sure, yeah. Except there's a real place.
Is that a Star Wars location?
No, it sounds like a Star Wars name. No, it's a real place. It's actually mentioned in the Bible, right? It's mentioned in the book of Genesis, because some of this material parallels the book of Genesis account of Abraham. There's controversy over where Ur of the Chaldees is. There's a site down in southern Iraq that most scholars want to identify as Abraham's Ur of the Chaldees. I myself am not persuaded by that argument, and I have a chapter, my colleagues and I have a chapter here about we think it may be somewhere else. I won't get in the weeds there. But we start in Ur of the Chaldees. Things aren't going well because Abraham's family are idolatrous. His father's idolatrous. His kinsfolk are idolatrous. They're worshiping these false idol gods. Abraham refuses to worship them, and so there's an attempt on his life. These idolatrous priests attempt to sacrifice him. He's miraculously saved by God, who promises that he will make a covenant with him, and he will lead him out of the idolatrous nation of his fathers and into the land of promise, right? So that's basically chapter 1. Chapter 1 also has this interesting, in my classes on Pro Great Price, I call it's an Urgeschichte. That's a good German word, an Urgeschichte, right? Meaning like a foundational myth, a foundational story, or a primeval history story. In this case, about the founding of Egypt, right? So there's this interesting discussion about Ham and Egyptus and what happened with all of that, right? So Abraham talks about that, and then we get into chapter 2 after that little digression where Abraham describes his journey into the land of Canaan. So he describes going from Ur of the Chaldees down into the land of Canaan, where he sets up some altars at some places and worships the Lord, right? There's a famine in the land of Canaan, and so he's pressed to go onward down into Egypt. And our text stops in the end of chapter 2 where God tells Abraham, when you go into Egypt, the Egyptians are going to see that Sarai, his wife, is really beautiful, right? She's a smoking hot babe, and they're going to kill you for it. And so God says, yeah, it's kind of intense, right? But they say, so God tells Abraham, tell the Egyptians that she is your sister instead of your wife, and then your life will be preserved. And we have a chapter in the book explaining that and why that's sort of an interesting sort of episode. That's where the narrative stops, right? That's where Abraham's sort of his journey as a narrative stops. Chapter 3 is a vision of the premortal council, right? The pre-existence. It's a vision of the cosmos. Abraham describes seeing the stars, the moon, the sun, and he describes a star that he calls Kolob. So
there you go.
Everybody knows and loves Kolob.
Kolob.
That's where it comes from. It comes from Abraham chapter 3, right? He describes this sort of cosmic system. We have a chapter in there, what we can say about the sort of cosmic map or vision that Abraham maps out for us. So that's chapter 3. He talks about the premortal existence. He sees a vision of God there in the council, the divine council of spirits. There's his son. There's another. They're just called the first and the second, right? Which is interesting. Moses is where they get names, Lucifer, right? And the only begotten son. But in Abraham, it's the first and the second. There's this dispute over whose plan are they going to follow. We all know this, right? As Latter-day Saints. So that's Abraham 3. Chapters 4 and 5 is a creation account that parallels Genesis chapter 1 and 2, right? 4 and 5, it runs through the creation. There are some significant differences in the book of Abraham creation account. For example, days, day 1, day 2, day 3, become times. The first time, the second time, the third time, right? In the book of Abraham, it's explicit that God is not creating ex nihilo, although that's not in Genesis either, but some people think it is, but it's not. But it's explicit in Abraham that God is ordering a cosmos. He's fashioning pre-existing matter into a cosmic system, right? He's ordering things to come into existence, and they obey God. Oh, by the way, it's also gods, plural, right? So we don't get a singular God. We get the gods are doing this. The gods are doing that. So that's Abraham 4. Abraham 5 gets into the Garden of Eden, and it stops in the middle of like Adam naming the animals, right? And the reason it stops is because that's as much as Joseph Smith published in Nauvoo in 1842. So if you're reading the story, it stops in the middle of Adam with the animals in the garden.
Such a cliffhanger.
A cliffhanger. We want to know what happens after that, right? But that's as much as Joseph Smith had at least published. There's a question if Joseph Smith translated more material than what we have. That's an open question. There's maybe some indication he did, but it's not entirely certain. but what he published is what appears in our Book of Abraham. So that's where it stops. There was promises by Joseph Smith and John Taylor, who takes over the newspaper after Joseph Smith, that he would publish more material. Sadly, it never happens, right? So that's our text. Our Book of Abraham also has 3 facsimiles. Facsimiles, they're pictures, they're copies. They are copies, that's what facsimile means. It's a copy of these Egyptian illustrations that were among his papyri fragments, right, or his papyrus scrolls. So facsimiles 1 and 3 depict scenes from the life of Abraham, right? Facsimile 1 correlates with Abraham chapter 1, where he was going to be sacrificed. Facsimile 3, interestingly enough, does not correlate with any of the published texts in the Book of Abraham. It shows Abraham discussing astronomy in the king's court, right, in Pharaoh's court. That's not narrated in our text, but that's a clue that that's where the story was going, right? Because we have the visual representation of it in the facsimile, but there's no published text. So we can be certain that that's where the story was going to pick up later, right?
So the facsimiles just be like Abraham drawing his life? Like he was writing about it and he got bored and he's like, let me draw a picture for you.
Let me draw a picture for you. Well, we have a chapter on the facsimiles. There's some complications with that too, right? Which we can maybe talk about.
Yeah.
So those are facsimiles 1 and 3. My favorite facsimile is facsimile 2, the round one, right?
The deep one.
The deep one. That's the fun one that has representations of Kolob and other. That correlates to Abraham chapter 3, right? This cosmic vision Abraham has. That one's super interesting, facsimile 2. So it correlates to Abraham chapter 3, and it's kind of a visual depiction of this cosmic system Abraham has a vision about. So in a nutshell, there's our Cliff's Notes version of what the Book of Abraham is. To answer your question, Mimi, it's very important for the church.
Yes.
The church gains a lot of significant doctrine from the Book of Abraham. The Abrahamic covenant, the premortal existence, the creation. It has ties with the temple and connections with what we learn in the temple. So it absolutely has an important place in the restoration, which is why there's a lot at stake with the Book of Abraham, whether this text is authentic or not, right? More than just, maybe Joseph Smith just kind of was having a bad day and didn't know what he was talking about. If this book isn't true, if it's fraudulent, that has serious grave implications for foundational doctrines in the church today, including premortal existence, creation, Abrahamic covenant, things of that nature, right? So it's very important for us. It doesn't get us cited as much as I would like it to. It was cited in General Conference a couple of times. Elder Oaks, Elder Cook. My ears, tune up whenever I hear a Book of Abraham citation, and Elder Cook and others definitely reciting it. So it's absolutely important for us in our restoration doctrine today. It's not just a curiosity stuck in the end of the scriptures. Like there's some very important things in there that we should be paying attention to.
Totally. And I think I didn't even realize that until we were preparing for this episode. I was like, oh my gosh, like that's where this came from.
Yeah,
the whole temple. It's very important. So
real quick though. So then chapter 1 and 2 of Book of Abraham, again, we don't need to get super into the weeds of this, but as a historian, does that narrative then match what secular people would view as Abraham's life and everything?
Good question, and that's the second part of our book, part 2, the Book of Abraham in the Ancient World. I don't want to oversell the case for the Book of Abraham. It's not like we've proven that it's true, right? Most biblical scholars actually, or many of them, they don't believe Abraham is actually a real person that existed. They think the stories about him are later fictional depictions of an earlier guy who was probably just made up. That's kind of the prevalent view. So from a strictly secular perspective, right, you may have a hard time trying to sell the Book of Abraham.
They think the whole guy's made up. It's hard to match.
Yeah, it's hard to sell them on the idea that he had a book he wrote, right? But what I can say is, we don't have proof that Abraham slept here this night, right? We're not talking about proof for the Book of Abraham. But we do have evidence for it. And that's the other big problem I have with most anti-Mormon discussions about the Book of Abraham is they pretend like the case is hopeless for the Mormons, right? You don't have a prayer for this thing. It's over. Pack up your bags. You lost the game with the Book of Abraham. That is absolutely not the case. And if you look through part 2 of our book, you will see example after example where we find very interesting and I think compelling convergence with the ancient world, with the world of Abraham. We're talking Middle Bronze Age in northern Mesopotamia and Canaan, right? So again, not that it's proving it, and not that I would hold this up and say, see, it's proof and you're all wrong, you all have to convert, right? I mean, I wish they would, but I wouldn't push it on people, right? But what I would say is, if you grant for the possibility that Abraham can be a real figure and that Joseph Smith could be a prophet that could reveal or translate sacred writings from Abraham, if you're at least able to grant that, here is a context or a perspective that can make sense of what's in the text with what we know from the broader world of the ancient Near East, right?
And then go pray about it. And
exactly.
Then you can actually know.
Exactly. And hopefully that will open up enough room, enough space for somebody to at least, again, exactly, take it to God to receive that confirmation. So part 2 of our book is not to prove it, like I've said before, but it is to say you can make a good positive case for the historicity of the text, for its authenticity. Not everything. I have questions still. There's still things that I kind of scratch my head when I read it. But if this was just being made up by Joseph Smith in 1835, he should not be getting right the things he gets right in the Book of Abraham, right? We're talking names, we're talking places, we're talking cultural practices, religious practices, right? Things that are unknown in 1835 that Joseph Smith should not be getting right just by guessing. And so that says to me, there's something about this text that's significant that I need to take seriously. And that helps reinforce my testimony I've received that this text is authentic and that it contains truths from God. So hopefully that helps give sort of a perspective on that, right? Cool. And hopefully it can help people who have questions about the Book of Abraham. Hopefully that's a helpful approach to this question about, well, what kind of evidence do we have for it? What kind of positive case can be made for it? Brother, I'm here to tell you, it's a good case that you can make for the Book of Abraham.
Period. I love to hear
and
that.
Again, that's my plug to
that's
go
why you
read
wrote
the
a
book.
book.
Right?
I think
That's why you read a book about
it's
it.
a decent idea if you want to take the effort to actually write a book.
Sure. Hopefully
this isn't just a letter that you posted online.
It's not an orange PDF. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
So I guess a related question then to that would be similar with the facsimiles then.
Right.
Looking from a historical, literal translation perspective, do you think what we have written in the Pearl of Great Price actually would directly match then what is depicted in there?
So yeah, the facsimile is another big question people wonder. And again, the reason why, I'll lay the cards on the table here. On the whole, right, Joseph Smith's interpretations of the facsimiles in their entirety do not accord with how Egyptologists today interpret these images, okay? So if I were to take these facsimiles to other Egyptologists, other colleagues or classmates of mine, right, and I were to ask them to interpret them, they would give very different interpretations from what Joseph Smith has or what he did. And
so
in fact,
he's wrong.
So he was wrong. Again, that's what people immediately jump to, right? However, I'd like to say if you look underneath the hood, right, you look really in the engine and see what's going on here, you actually find components to Joseph Smith's explanations that do have very interesting grounding from an Egyptological perspective. And our chapter in the book is to try to help make sense of that and to give examples of that, right? Again, it's nothing that necessarily proves it's all true and, therefore the other Egyptologists are just wrong, right? I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you have to unpack some of your assumptions, and we have a chapter about that. How do you approach the facsimiles? What do you think about them? What you assume about them? And what you assume about Joseph Smith's interpretations of the facsimiles will very well influence what you take with this fact that they don't match the Egyptologists. If you take it further and deeper, however, you begin to see individual places where, again, it's really remarkable how well Joseph Smith's explanations do accord with Egyptological understanding and Egyptological knowledge, right? Especially with facsimile 2. Again, this is why I love facsimile 2. There's no shortage of really interesting things that you can give there. Again, for the sake of time and to encourage people to read the book, I'd encourage them to go check it out, right? But we go through some of the figures individually and show from an Egyptological basis, here's how we can make sense of Joseph Smith's interpretation. And it is very interesting and compelling in some cases, right? So, yes, the point is true. Joseph Smith's explanations don't accord with how Egyptologists explain it on the whole, right? However, there are individual components that you do find very interesting, if you want to call convergence or validation or whatever. Mm-hmm. Again, that to me says there's something more going on with this text than he's just making everything up. If he's just making everything up, he should be getting 0 things right. The fact that he is getting some things right is to me very significant, and I hope makes space for people to exercise faith that even though we can't answer everything now, even though we can't satisfy all the criticisms now or the questions now, we can build a foundation to build on, right? We can lay a foundation to build on, and we can allow the Spirit to work within us to give us that confirmation. So again, I know it's sort of a cop-out to say go read the book, but go read the book, right? That'll give you a sense of what I'm coming at here and what we mean by that.
All right.
I wonder from just thinking of both sides, like I'm sure there might be critics watching this and saying like, well, how is that not just like seeking for what you want to find?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, do you have a response to that?
Sure. You know what? That's absolutely a concern to have, is confirmation bias, as we call it, right? That's a trap that everybody will fall into at some point. You have to be careful about. Again, I freely acknowledge I have my own bias in this, right, as a believing Latter-day Saint. However, the fact that four Egyptologists all wrote this together, and the fact that it was peer-reviewed, and the fact that it went through a rigorous vetting process by other Egyptologists to make sure that even if our conclusions, you don't agree with all of our conclusions necessarily, the information we're presenting is accurate, right? We have tried the best we can to try to check our biases. So the other thing I wanted to mention here into this question of confirmation bias is my colleagues and I, we have disagreements amongst each other. My co-authors and I did, right? We did not see eye to eye on all of these issues. But we worked together to form a consensus where we all felt comfortable enough to move forward, which I think hopefully helped check some of our biases individually, right? And so certainly, like I said, it's a valid question or concern. Smoot, you're just a biased Mormon apologist. I hear it all the time, right? You're teaching at BYU. You've got skin in the game. You're invested in this. Yes, that's true. All that's true. However, that doesn't in and of itself negate the fact that myself and my co-authors have academic qualifications. We have tried to go through the academic process as best we can to present this book to the world. My bias may be a non-starter for some people. I'm sure there are people listening that think that just the fact that I'm a Latter-day Saint teaching at BYU, that's enough to just shut down any consideration. Fine. I can't do anything about that. All I can say is give me a shot, right?
Yeah.
And if there is something that my confirmation bias is clouding my judgment on, right, let me know. Like, give me a good reason to show where I'm wrong, right?
And not just be mean and be like,
and not just
you're dumb.
Right, exactly, right. And so I believe that the ongoing process of dialogue and discussion in these things, the ongoing academic process, I'm confident it will make the case for the Book of Abraham stronger, so I'm not afraid of it. I welcome it, but you have to at least grant me my sincerity and my intelligence, right, for us to have this dialogue and this conversation.
Awesome. No, I love talking to you about this because I feel like when you hear Book of Abraham brought up in an anti-Mormon setting, like from a critic of the church, it just sounds like, okay, game over. Like,
yeah,
really,
right.
You've heard this about the Book of Abraham and you're going to stay in the church, you're dumb. But like just talking to you, obviously I have a testimony of the Book of Abraham and I'm with you, but like just hearing you talk about like, the historic evidence and everything, it's just so cool. Like, I don't know. It's not game over. You know what I mean?
Absolutely not. No, you're absolutely right, Mimi.
There's more evidence than I even thought.
That narrative is prevalent, but it's wrong. Okay? So again, I'm not here to say, I've proven it all once and for all, and I've settled all the dispute, right? But it is intellectually dishonest to claim that there's no positive case to be made for the Book of Abraham, to claim that it's game over for the Mormons, right? Like you don't have a hope or a prayer, right? Like this is what you get. That's just not true. Okay. And so hopefully what this book can do is to let people know that, and to let them know that there is a grounding for faith in this text, right? It is ultimately a matter of faith, a matter of testimony. I completely acknowledge that, right? But it's not blind faith.
Right.
And it's certainly
you don't have
not
to just ignore all of history,
Exactly.
all of scholars, and just say, okay, well, science says this, but I'm gonna pray and just know they're all wrong.
You don't need to make that compartmentalization, absolutely. And so, if nothing else, I hope that this book is able to help Latter-day Saints and others with sincere questions, able to help them see that, right, as they make their own decisions of what they believe and why they believe it, right. If that's the least I can do, then fine. I'll be happy with it. But of course, I would be happy if people agree with me, because who doesn't want that, right? But no, really, right? Like at a minimum, I'm hoping that we can combat this false narrative out there, right? I'm fine if people want to say, you know what, Smoot, I read your book. I'm not convinced. I still don't believe it's authentic. Okay, right? Like, if you at least grant me the courtesy of hearing my argument, and if you grant me the courtesy of saying, you know what, I don't agree with you, but I see how you could believe this, right? Like, if that's enough. And as a matter of fact, I had a discussion with a classmate some time ago about this very subject at Catholic University, right? He asked me, Smoot, I know you're a Mormon. What do you think about this Book of Abraham stuff? Can I ask you? And we had a very respectful conversation. And that was kind of the vibe, right? That we came to say, well, obviously I don't believe it, but I can respect to see how you could believe it. And you know what I mean? Like, so if nothing else, hopefully people will get that out of it. But I hope they'll get more. I hope that they will be able to see the positives in the Book of Abraham, the richness of this text, the wonderful things in this text, and that they can have a foundation for their faith to build on.
And become an Egyptologist themselves.
Absolutely not. Do not throw your life away like I have becoming an Egyptologist. I'm looking at the audience right now. You have so much to live for. Don't throw your life away like I have. Money is a good thing. Gainful employment is a good thing. You want to go into business and law and medicine. Don't become an Egyptologist like I have.
Yeah. There you go. I mean, specializing in the Book of Abraham, there's like 2 jobs in the world you could ever have, or else you're out on the street, right? So don't make your boss mad, or you're in
that's
trouble.
Right. Yeah. People have asked me, what can you do with the degree that you're doing? And I say, well, I can either become a university professor or I can be a door greeter at Costco. Those are kind of my options I get with this, right?
Which, being a door greeter at Costco wouldn't be the worst thing.
As a matter of fact, I'd say it's less shameful than being a university professor, right? Because at least Costco is giving a good, valuable service to the community.
And you can try and pass out books on the way out the door too.
Sure, just sneak them in their grocery.
Here's your smiley face out, right? And your book in your cart.
Yeah,
there you go.
You're good to go, right? Exactly. Yeah.
Well, this has been so great. Do you have any other questions about Book of Abraham or anything else?
I think we've covered it. From any other criticisms I heard people voice or anything. I mean, I guess if you guys have more questions, find Stephen out in public, bully him.
Absolutely.
When he's headed into the store, just grab him, whatever it takes.
If you see me on the you see me on the streets of Provo, right, come up to me and smack me over the face with your book. I don't know, right? I probably deserve it. I'm sure.
No physical violence against Stephen. I'm giving the authorization to harass him on the street.
Okay, sure.
Don't touch him.
That's fine. Again, I probably deserve it, so please, by all means, right?
No, but this really was such a great conversation. I can't thank you enough. And if there's one thing anyone listening, I don't know if there's anyone listening who may be struggling with the Book of Abraham, but or
Revelation or Joseph Smith in general. I mean, it all kind of ties in.
Before you rabbit hole and start to doubt everything, please, read the scriptures, try to develop a testimony of it for yourself, which I'm sure you're already doing, but there's great resources out here like Stephen's book. Please just remember where you're getting your information from and educate yourself, please, from experts. And of course, pray and read it for yourself, but just make sure you do your due diligence. And not to say people who've left the church haven't done that,
right?
But
sure,
if you are someone struggling with this, I really hope that this conversation has inspired you to do that. So
I hope so too, and thank you. Right? Again, I guess my parting word about the Book of Abraham would be: I'm convinced it's authentic, both from an intellectual perspective, and I've felt the Spirit testify to me that its truths are true and eternal. Its teachings are true. So that's where I'm coming from. That's, again, I acknowledge my bias in this. However, I hope that what my co-authors and I have been able to do in this book is, like I said, give people a counter narrative to what you hear, that it's game over, that there's no salvaging this Book of Abraham, right? That's absolutely not the case. I hope that this will clear the weeds, as it were, right? Precisely as you said, Mimi, this will not prove to people that this is all true. This will not prove beyond any doubt, right, that Joseph Smith was a prophet, right? But what I hope it will do is clear the weeds so that people can then go to their Father in heaven and gain that spiritual witness for themselves, right? I believe very passionately, or I agree passionately with President Nelson when he said that good information is needed for good inspiration, right? And we hope to fulfill that side of the equation by giving good information so that people can engage with this text and hopefully feel that confirmation of the Spirit. It's a fantastic text. Like I've said, when you pop open the hood and you see what's in the engine, it's like a Ferrari, right? It's like a German sports car, right? It's really great what's happening with this small text. It's 5 small chapters, right? Again, we just kind of throw it in the back of the book, right? And talk about it maybe once or twice in Old Testament year for Come Follow Me. But spend time with it, read it slowly, ponder it, take your time with it, ask good questions about what you're reading. I've had the spiritual confirmation come to me, and I'm confident it can come to other people.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your brain. Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine.
And my charming good looks, right? No,
yes.
I'm just kidding.
No, I can't
that's very nice of you,
what
Mimi.
it would
Thank
be
you.
like to be as smart as you. I think my brain would explode. So I'm grateful that we can talk to people like you. And so book, again, remind us where we can find it. And then is there anywhere we can follow you on social media? How can people keep up with you?
So I'm not on social media, actually, right?
Probably good.
Yeah, it's not really my scene.
People need to mail you clay tablets to keep in touch.
That's right, exactly. I'm going to be the Mark Zuckerberg of clay tablet social media, right? So, the book is A Guide to the Book of Abraham. You can access it for free at byustudies.byu.edu, or if you Google the name, you can find it there.
And we'll link it, actually.
Yeah, link it.
We'll
there
have
you go.
it in the description.
You've got a link, right?
Yeah.
But I'm afraid to say that you can't really find me on social media. I mean, I have a personal Facebook page because, again, I'm like a boomer at this point, right? But but if you do see me on campus or you see me around, say hello, and
you don't
we
have
can
to
chat.
harass him. You could be friendly.
You could.
Nice.
I wouldn't say no to that, right? I'm a friendly dude, I know in some corners of the internet I have this reputation of being this mean guy. I mean, I can be snarky sometimes. Yeah, I can be a little snarky sometimes. I was snarky here a little bit,
but
right? But only to people who deserve it, right? To people that are like, that are nice, that are just like cool people, I can be a friendly, fun guy. So come say hi to me on BYU campus or in Provo somewhere, right? And we'll have a good time. We'll go to Peace on Earth Cafe on Center Street. We'll have some milk steamers, talk about Book of Abraham, right? It'll be fantastic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Milk steamers, where it's at.
Milk steamers with a sugar-free hazelnut flavoring. Yeah, you can't go wrong.
Okay, what about a pumpkin spice?
Absolutely.
Okay.
People.
I was expecting you to say absolutely not.
No.
I was ready for that.
Oh, no. Absolutely. I am 100% basic when it comes to pumpkin spice stuff. Like, you can inject it into my veins, right?
Oh, yeah.
I set my calendar to every October when I know pumpkin spice is coming back, right? Like,
or September this year or August pretty soon.
Yeah.
It's like how Christmas keeps moving back. Pumpkin spice lattes keep moving back.
That's true. I've seen them like in August or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But if I can tie in the Egyptians, right? So the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star, right, in the night sky, Sirius, the heliacal rising of it coincided with the flooding of the Nile. So for the ancient Egyptians, the rise of Sirius in the horizon was important to them because it was the sign that the Nile was going to flood. For me, the return of pumpkin spice on the menu is the indication to me, right, that like the gods have rejuvenated creation and like it takes on like mythological significance for me. So meet me in Provo. We'll go to Peace on Earth. We'll have our pumpkin spice milk steamers, right? And it'll be fantastic.
Iconic.
All right.
Well, thank you again for coming on. And thank you all for watching.
See you guys.
Thanks.